Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Nest Files. My name's Michael Carroll, sitting next to me.
Hi, I'm Haley Fish.
And we want to start off first by saying thank you for an amazing 2011. We had some awesome people on, Keith Johnson, Andrea Perron, among many others. 2012, we're bringing it a little different. We're going to have interviews coming out, of course. But we're also going to start having some evidence, some quote-unquote evidence, pictures, videos from our guest for them to share with you. So we hope that entices you a little bit more to start following us. And again, we thank you for tuning in. Today's guest, we have Andrew Lake from the Greenville Paranormal Society. He's the founder of it. He's also the author of Ghost Hunting Southern New England. We welcome him on today. Andrew, how are you?
Thanks for having me on. Great being here. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure having you on. Many weeks of trying.
Yeah.
So we'll start off one of our basic questions to really snowball into it. What got you into the paranormal? Everyone wants to know what gets an author or gets an enthusiast of the field into it. So what got you into it?
For me, it was the personal experience at a very young age.
Okay.
I was 11 years old, staying with some family friends in Situate, Massachusetts, at a very old Victorian house that the family owned. They only used it as a summer beach house because it was just too cold for anybody to live in the winter. Very thin walls, very drafty, but a great beach house to stay in. And I had stayed there a few times as a young kid. But when I was 11, it was about 1975, staying there, and after running around the beach all day and eating hot dogs and all kinds of summer fun, usually when I went to bed in that house, I would go to sleep, solid as a rock. But one night I woke up. It was 2:35 because I could see the alarm clock in the room. It was illuminated. And I looked out the window, and there was a half moon hanging above the trees. And the house was absolutely still and quiet. And I'm laying there thinking, why did I just wake up? And there's a strange vibe in the air. You just feel there was something not right. Well, directly below my bedroom was the kitchen to the house. And the floorboards to the room I'm in are the boards to the ceiling above you. So it isn't like a floor and a ceiling. It's just and very old slotted boards. So at night, if you were sitting upstairs in a darkened room and someone turned a light on in the kitchen, the light would actually stream up through the boards. If you got down on your knees, you could actually look in through some of the floorboards and see into the kitchen if you really tried. Well, I'm laying there in bed, and I start hearing the sounds I've heard many, many times in that house coming from the kitchen, being the chairs sliding back and forth, the drawers opening and closing, the silverware being handled, plates and bowls clanking. But yet there's no lights on downstairs. My bedroom door's open, and you have to go right by my bedroom to go down the creaky staircase.
So you tried figuring out what's causing it?
I'm laying there thinking, well, who in my friend's family were not the type of people to get up in the middle of the night and have midnight snacks. They were very, very stern, rigid, disciplined family. They just weren't midnight cereal bowl eaters. You know what I'm saying? And I'm laying there thinking, this is odd. And then I realized that not only is there no lights on downstairs, there are no footsteps going with these sounds. And then they just stop. And nobody leaves the kitchen. Nobody goes into the living room. Nobody comes up the stairs. And I eventually fall back to sleep. The next morning I asked, who got up and went to the kitchen? And everybody looked at me like I had two heads. So I let it go. Next night I woke up at exactly the same time.
Okay.
Look up, the moon's in the same spot, the clock's same time, and the sounds start up all over.
It's like Groundhog Day all over.
Yeah, but it's same sounds, but again, no footprints, no light. Nobody went by my bedroom, either down or up. And it just stops. So when I brought it up the second day, I find out that my friend's great aunt had passed away in the house. It was her house, and her picture was at the bottom of the staircase. So I am convinced with the vibe I picked up, the sounds that I heard downstairs, it was my friend's.
So you don't need EVPs or anything,
no,
you knew.
You just knew it, you could feel it. You just knew there was something going on, and it just the house had that very weird stillness to it. And then I'd say it was about 2 years later on a family trip to England. I had an experience with a haunting in that house. I just knew that place was haunted. My mother agreed. She and I heard this series of noises in the house, something moving down the hallway, almost like the cliched ghost sound, like the dragging chains and the heavy breathing. And my brother and father slept all the way through it, and we didn't say anything. We said to nobody. And years later, when my parents were running their own travel business out of the home, they sent a friend on his honeymoon throughout Europe.
Okay.
And she's very self-conscious whenever she sent somebody on a trip. So when this person got back, she called him and said, hey, how'd everything go? Did everything go fine? And he went, oh, Alicia, the trip went great. except for that haunted house you stuck me in England. And he proceeds to describe the same exact
Without knowing
sounds.
anything about your past?
Didn't know anything about it. My mother listened to him and just went, well, let me tell you, back in 1977, in that same house, this is what happened to us. And he was like, so I'm not nuts, huh? My wife didn't wake up. She slept through the whole thing. My mother goes, my husband slept through the whole thing, too.
77, you look about 35, am I right?
Well, no, I'll be 48 next month.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, all right.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that. But again, talking about very early, experiences at a very early age. And, I was always getting out the books on the paranormal out of the library. And that's where my background comes from. I used to read about ghost hunting. There were no TV shows until
Right.
In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy.
Right. Yeah, I've heard that was like really the one that started everyone.
It was
It was
well
paramount
done.
in the field.
Yeah, I mean, if you go to YouTube and watch some of the old episodes,
Yeah.
you can see they were very well done. But Hans Holzer was their go-to guy for ghosts. And of course, I grew up with Holzer and Harry Price and Peter Underwood and the old school ghost hunters.
Right.
And like I said, it wasn't until In Search Of in the late 70s, and of course Henry Winkler did the excellent Sightings that was on the Sci-Fi Network, which is a very good show. But through personal experiences, but I tell people this all the time, through the 70s and 80s, if you try to bring up the subject of ghosts,
It was taboo.
oh, people would just talk down to you like you were a fool. And I would say it wasn't till these quote unquote ghost shows started on TV.
Dime a dozen now.
Yeah, I know. I mean, you can't swing a dead cat without hitting one. But at least I think it's opened the general public's mind. So I've noticed that through the 70s and 80s and even into the 90s, you had trouble bringing this stuff up.
Right.
Shows like In Search Of and Sightings did open some people's minds to the topic, but it was tough being a ghost hunter through the 70s and 80s. Looking for stories, it was tough to
Yeah,
find.
I was not even around when those shows were on,
Exactly.
and even still, I was too young to even comprehend them. I started watching Unsolved Mysteries, and that was the one
Another
that
good
really
one.
took me off.
Another good show.
The acting was horrible, but the stories and the thought process behind it was fantastic.
Good research.
Oh yeah, definitely, absolutely.
Robert Stack.
Yeah, I miss him to death. Now they still have it, but it's not the same.
No, it's just not the same without Robert. I agree.
So you pretty much researched before you really started to delve into it.
Yeah, I was always looking for a ghost story. I would say, very rarely, but it would happen. I'd find somebody, once all the naysayers were out of the room, they go, well, let me tell you something that happened to me once,
Yeah.
And that's what I would live for. I would live for those personal stories. For about 9 years, I worked in the home healthcare field in my 20s and into my early 30s. And going in and out of people's homes, setting up medical equipment, oxygen equipment, beds, and so on and so forth. When patients would pass away, sometimes when I go to pick up the equipment, I would hear some very interesting stories about the moment of the person's passing. Somebody in the family would ask me, do you believe in a life after death, or do you believe in the supernatural? And I would be honest with them and say, yes, I do. And I'd have a lot of people take me into their confidence and tell me these remarkable things that happened when their grandmother passed away last night or that morning. And I'd also hear the occasional family ghost story, like, oh yeah, we got a ghost, we call him George, he does this stuff. And but more importantly, during that time in my life, not only was I hearing this throughout the day, I'd go home to an old apartment in Situate, Rhode Island, named after the same town, Situate, Massachusetts.
Right.
Situate, Rhode Island, and stayed in a very old boarding house that was turned into an apartment house. And I had some things happening in there, and had a neighbor come up to me and go, hey, how you making out in there? And I looked at him and went, this place is haunted, isn't it? And they laughed and went, yeah, a lot of people don't stay in that house that long. How are you making out? And I was like, yeah, I've been having these things happening. So I'd be working all day long with this sick and elderly, then I'd go home to just have dinner and TV, and I'd have ghostly happenings going out of my apartment.
And we get a lot of people all over the U.S. that talk to us. And I have family, like everyone else, all over the U.S. and world, essentially. And, some of my family is, I'm looking to go out west to search for more answers. And they're like, stay in New England. Stay in New England, that's where it is. Do you agree with that?
Yeah.
New England is the hotbed of activity?
Well, travel broadens the mind. So if you can travel anywhere, I'd say, yeah, of course, go there. I mean, I've been to Great Britain, up to Canada. I've been, throughout parts of the United States. But I really feel that New England is probably one of the most haunted places in the world. And I'll tell you, I just recently helped a Spanish film crew that came to the United States to do a documentary in the Bridgewater Triangle.
Okay.
And they had asked if I could be their guide to take them around to key places. And Santiago Camacho, who is the host of a paranormal show on, I believe it's Channel 4 in Spain, airs on Sunday nights. He was a hard journalist, doing hard news, and it wasn't until halfway through his life he saw a flying saucer take up out of the mountains in Spain, and that's when he realized,
It clicked.
oh, yeah, there's stuff going on in the world that I don't know about. So he became a big paranormal enthusiast because of that, and even though a UFO is what got his interest,
Right.
he became fascinated with ghost stories. And he told me that his friends in Spain are like, Santa, you know more about New England ghosts than you do our own ghosts.
Right.
So for him to come to New England to be able to shoot in the Bridgewater Triangle was like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm actually here, pinch me.
And then he could take all that information and then go back home with it and
Right.
share ideas there that they may not have because
Yeah.
they may not be as active as we are, or vice versa. We can go over there and learn from them and then bring it back here.
Oh, certainly. But I guess the point I'm getting about New England is that there's a certain mystique about it.
Yeah.
I mean, even people that I know in England are like, boy, I'd love to come to New England and hunt me some of your ghosts. It's like, you can't throw a rock at England without hitting a haunted place. But there's a certain mystique, because
Right.
we have Native American ghosts or
Right.
Indian ghosts. And not many people in Europe have the chance of seeing maybe.
And a lot of the Native American burial spots are gone to the sands of time now. So you don't know where they are, and you get activity happening in a general location. You may be like, well, there's no cemetery there. Well, there might be. We just don't know about it. And that's another thing that a lot of people get into is, well, there's no cemeteries. I'm on a farm area. There's nothing here. But there really is, probably. They just got to dig a little down.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of New England graves with just simple field stones.
Right.
And someone comes along, buys that property, 100
Tears
years
it
after.
up thinking it's
they don't
just
even
a
know
rock.
it's just a stone,
Yeah.
and there's no, and they probably couldn't even afford a box.
Right.
But, after 200-300 years,
It's
that wood's going to be gone.
It's going to be dust anyways.
Whether it was a shroud or whatever. So, yeah, who knows what's on the land you're building on. But anyway, just to finish the point, yeah, I would say New England, especially southern New England, is probably one of the most haunted
And thanks
places.
to that comment, you just created 10 more groups out there from people watching. They're like, wow, I'm right in Connecticut. I can start my own group now. And
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, Rhode Island, it's getting absolutely silly. We're the smallest state in the union, and we've been joking about it, myself and some of the other groups. It's so many groups just popping up all over Rhode Island. And I think there's probably more ghost hunting groups than plumbers right now in Rhode Island. It's kind of silly, but it's just the way
no
it is.
pun intended with the biggest one, ghost hunters out there, how they were plumbers when they
Well,
started.
that's what I meant. That was a little joke, but
Yeah.
that's how it's gotten. But no, I don't think you have to go far in New England to find a haunted location.
Yeah, they're pretty much right in your own backyard.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I know you're the founder of Greenville Paranormal. How did, your experiences, translate to taking that step to having your own group? And then is it just the search for answers, or is it, wow, this is interesting and I want to do it? Or what made you decide to get into having a group?
Well, yeah, I refer to myself as Greenville Paranormal Research.
Okay.
I'm basically a one-man band to a point, not completely on my own. But to answer your question, it was 2006. Actually, 2005, I'd had my life came to an abrupt change. I had an illness in the family, and I felt it was my dad, and I didn't want him being put in a nursing home. I wanted to keep him home and take care of him myself. And I walked away from a job that was just absolutely pointless. It was just, it was just wearing me out, going to put me in an early grave. It just wasn't worth it. So I figured, I knew this was coming. I was in home health care. I always told myself in my 20s, one day, someone in your family could get ill, just like with this family I'm
Right.
helping. So I was mentally prepared for it. So I left this job and I started taking care of my dad. And I said to myself, all right, I got to do something for myself here. What is this drastic change in my lifestyle? What is this going to allow me to do? And it took about 3 seconds for me to go research. Now, when my father's in bed and maybe I have one of the CNAs there to keep an eye on him for me, I could take off to a town hall, to a library, or maybe just to an area, knock on some doors and introduce myself and just, start asking questions. So I figured the best thing to do was to create a group, so to speak.
Right.
So when I introduced myself, handed out a business card, they'd go,
Looks
okay.
a little more professional.
Exactly. It just isn't, hi, I'm Andy looking for
Right.
ghosts. It's, So I was basically a one-man band and just did my best to start collecting as many stories as I could and looking into the ones that were well-known in Rhode Island or seemed to be well-known.
Right.
That I started to look at and go, you know what, I think this has turned into an urban legend. I think this has turned into a campfire story. Let me see if I can find some actual history that explains why this ghost story came about. And I just stayed on top of it. And, the more places I looked into, the more connections I made. And No boast, no brag. I do work with probably some of the best ghost hunters Southern New England have to offer, and by associating with them and having the mutual respect for one another, that hey, you're not just trying to get on TV. You do this because it's important to you, and you do the research. I've got involved in quite a nice network of people, and to compile this information. And I've done everything from straighten out stories that I feel have been told incorrectly and can find historic research to back it up, to investigations in private homes, businesses, and maybe a few famous, haunted locations, and do my best to compile the stories from other people, and who knows, maybe collect, some EVPs or photographs.
That's how the urban legends get created, isn't it? Though you have a story that gets fascinated over time, and people throw in their own details to make the story a little bit better. They embellish on it, so it has that scary factor. So when they tell it to somebody, they're like, wow, I got to know more about it, and then they keep adding it. And so, I mean, digging back, like you're saying, finding the newspaper articles or what have you, that's the way to go about, getting to the roots of it and seeing what happened.
And
Definitely
sometimes you find out the real story spookier than the urban legend or the campfire
Pretty
version.
much.
Yeah.
Or a lot of times it's not even close to what it is. It was someone that passed away, and that person that passed away, there's a door creaking or, so on. And it's probably just the wind or a house settling, and they automatically think that it's the person passed on.
Right.
So that's another thing, and not to discourage them, but that's just the way it is sometimes.
Yeah, it can be fueled by people's imaginations. It also can be like I was looking into the Green Lady of Burlington.
Right.
And the more I looked into it, apparently somebody.
That's Elizabeth Pelham.
Yeah,
if I pronounce it right.
Yeah, but the thing is, the more you look into it. It seems to be a story that was started by a Boy Scout camp on the other side of the woods.
Right.
And counselors were telling this good ghost story. And then you have kids trusting their counselors growing up and going, well, Counselor Ted said there was a glowing green lady. You look into it, you'll never find anybody who said she's actually, been seen.
It's weird because we were actually up there last year, right, if I'm not mistaken, or is it 2010? Either way, we were there and with a couple other groups, and we were at the cemetery, and her stone's no longer there. And when we were up there, it's just the cemetery is a vacant area. It's a cemetery.
Yeah.
But the swamp that's supposedly on the other side of the stone wall is no more. It's just the woods. So it doesn't really fit, because everyone's like, there's this great swamp back here. And you can kind of imagine it once you heard the story enough, where she's, in the swamp and her husband's refusing to help her or whatever it was. It's weird how over time details have changed, even subtle little details. It definitely is. Yeah, definitely. I see all your points. What you're coming across as. You definitely know your stuff. You're a top guy, one of the top people.
Well, thank you. No, like I said, I think it pays off when you really do the research, because, like I said, sometimes the actual story is even better than the one that was made up. So, so I basically formed Greenville Paranormal Research and just stayed on it. But you come across with people saying, hey, a friend of mine's got a problem, or someone will find the website and say, hey, just wonder if maybe you'd come by and see what you think. We think we may have a ghost. And something that, because I'm old school, like I said, I'm not a fan of the big shows. A lot of ghost hunting groups model themselves after the TV shows, whereas I'm sort of old school. I'm not a big gadget guy, there's nothing wrong with technology. If somebody wants to be a gadget ghost hunter, all the power to you. You go that route. But I felt that Hans Holzer hit the nail on the head when he said, if you're a ghost hunter and you don't work with a psychic medium, you're just a guy walking around with an EMF meter.
Right.
Now, I know a lot of younger ghost hunters, listen to me, I'm 48, so I say younger ghost hunters, they roll their eyes at that. They really, they put more faith into a K2 meter or an infrared camera or something, which is okay, that's fine. But
with the K2, even a cell phone could hit it off.
It could be.
Something as basic as that.
But it doesn't. I'm not saying you should, disclose it to an investigation. But a very good friend of mine who's a police officer had come by to see how I was doing, and he said, "Hey, Andrew, I've met a woman who I've determined is absolutely legit. She's a psychic medium. She doesn't do it for a living. She doesn't do readings at restaurants or anything. She's just a mom of 5, white collar professional, and she's, she has this ability." So I kept saying to my friend, will you please introduce me, because I'd like to meet her. Long story short, I got to know her, and I'd go out and do investigations with her. My running joke for a while was, "You're a fraud, and I'm going to prove it." And by the third investigation I did with her, I remember getting in the car.
You were
that night.
convinced.
I looked at her and said, "Joke's over. You're the real thing." I mean, the hits were just too
Accurate.
detailed,
Right.
too detailed, too accurate. And Pam Padalano is her name, and she's like the sister I never had. And we've become a ghost hunting team, and with a friend of ours who's a professional historian, Jim McNasher.
Okay.
As Jim says, I'm not a ghost guy. He himself is a retired police officer, but in his retirement, he's now written 4 books on local history. And even though he's not a ghost guy, he appreciates the fact that Pam and I try to get some historic research to back up anything she may have hit, any EVPs I may have caught, whatever the case might
Right.
be. So as a 3-person team, I think we're very well rounded, and we've worked well together.
So you're pretty much Greenville Paranormal.
Yeah, but I'm flexible. Like, people get in touch with me and say, "Hey, do you let people just like tag along to investigation?" Sure, I'll call you up. Make sure you're not a loony, before I bring you to some friend's house, to ghost hunt. And I've done that. I've even helped some kids get some A's on high school term papers
Very
who wanted
nice.
to do, So I'm flexible. There's no lead investigator, no this, and it's just
Right.
come, use our bodies. That's
Okay.
Harry Price.
Right.
This was the #1 ghost tool right here.
Right.
Just sit there and feel your environment.
Yeah.
Take notes.
That's pretty much true compared to, I mean, technology is great, but it can also fail you at just as fast. And I see a lot of people using the ghost box, which is that hacked, whatever they want to
Yes.
call it. I'm not a fan of it. But yeah, we don't have the latest and greatest equipment. We have cameras, we have a couple of K2s, a couple of digital voice recorders, and we're fine with that. We want to go and be able to get this and get that, but I mean, personal experience is enough.
Yes.
But a lot of times people don't count that. They'll take a personal experience and they'll discount it because it's not on film. It's not caught for everyone else to see. What do you think about that? That people just are quick to dismiss, what you say.
Well, that's a very good point to touch upon, because this is something very important, and I've been telling a lot of my colleagues lately, and they think about it and they all agree with me. I absolutely am not in this to prove the existence of ghosts, because nobody is
Right.
ever going to prove the existence of ghosts, which is another reason why I got out of the gadget end of it, because you catch something on a video, you bring it to me.
Right.
We've communicated. We've met once before.
Yep.
We communicate on Facebook. You bring something to me, I'm going to go, "Oh, well, Michael's bringing me something. Let me sit down and look at it." And I'll look at it, and if I can't say, "Well, that's a car headlight," I'll look at it and go, "Wow, Mike, good catch."
Right.
That looks to
It
me like
could be
somebody.
something.
It's something walking. But you and I both know we can't go to the media and go, "We now have proof
Right.
that," just because you got this remarkable video or photograph. So yeah, I would just say to people who poo-poo personal experiences, it's like, I think it's just as valuable as that EVP or that video clip.
And I know you're a big author. A lot of the world doesn't know about you yet. Actually, I was talking to a friend of mine, Jenny Gurney, out of Minnesota, and she asked me earlier. She's like, "Who you have on?" I said, "Andrew Lake." She's like, "Great, I don't know him." And I was like, "You gotta know him. Here's all his info. You gotta know about him." Why don't you tell us about your new book you have out here?
Well, actually, this is my first book.
Okay.
This came about through my very good friend Jeff Belanger, who most of your viewers probably know, created GhostVillage.com.
Right.
Jeff was way ahead of the curve, stepped out of into the sunlight to bring ghost stories to people long before the TV show started. But I was talking to Jeff about some ideas I had through my research for a book. And Jeff was like, "Oh yeah, you definitely should write a book. Definitely should write a book." And then within about 2 weeks, he called me up and said, "Hey, I got a phone number. I want you to call a good friend of mine. His name is John Kachuba. He's the editor for a book series that Clearacy Books has put out called America's Haunted Road Trip Series." So I called up John, and I had a very nice conversation with him. And he basically said, we've touched many states throughout the United States, and also regions. Like, I think they cut California up into a couple of sections, like ghost
San
hunting.
Bernardino.
Yeah,
and
like
so forth.
like ghost hunting Northern California or something like that. And they said, we want to do Southern New England. We want to do Mass, Rhode Island, and Connecticut, and we need somebody to write this. So he gave me basically the guidelines, because it had to fit the series. He said, "I need you to write about places that the public can go to either have a meal, take a tour, stay over the night, go shopping, whatever the case might be. But it isn't like a private residence. It isn't an abandoned building that you're not supposed to be trespassing in to
Right.
begin with. It's places the public can go for another reason besides it being haunted, and it has to be set up like a guidebook.
Right.
So he had gone to my website. He saw my website, greenvilleparanormal.com. Told me he thought it was one of the best sites he'd seen, which I was very flattered. And said, you have the job if you want it. You got a year to do it. You have to go to all these locations. You have to take the photographs. You have to freshly interview people there.
Get a new take on their stories that have been passed down.
Exactly. So that's what I did for a year. I went around Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island to find sites that were appropriate for the book. And easier said than done, especially in this economy.
It's a bit of travel.
I found, it was a bit of travel, but I also found places that no longer exist. Either burned to the ground, went out of business. It's no longer a restaurant. It's a hair salon.
Right.
And
The owner shuts the door when you come to talk to them.
that happened a couple of times. There was one place that just absolutely, that's ridiculous. This place isn't haunted. Somebody put that on the internet and
Then they shut the door and you look in the window and you wave goodbye to someone.
Just
Yeah.
about. Yeah, very close to that. But found 36 sites that the public can visit. Not all of them are restaurants. Rhode Island, for instance, one of the chapters is a town.
Okay.
It's Hopkins Mills in Foster, Rhode Island. It's a very great, pretty place to take a car ride and do some fishing and take some photographs. And as you drive along, there's like one haunted spot right after another. You can almost walk from.
So is
one
it
haunted
actual
site to
still
another.
buildings existing, or is it foundation?
No, it's foundation holes and
Okay.
things like that, but it's very picturesque. I mean, I had to talk to my editor and say, look, Rhode Island doesn't have a whole heck of a lot of haunted restaurants, hotels, so on
Small
and so forth.
estate.
Yeah, it's a small estate. And I said, but we do have a lot of haunted locations. So he said, okay, we'll be a little bit flexible in Rhode Island. Go ahead, write about some locations. He says, I like the idea of taking a legend trip in a
Right.
car. He says, that is a fun thing to do. Yeah, I buy that. But Connecticut was a little bit tricky. I have to tell you, Connecticut people are a little bit closed mouth about their
Yeah,
ghosts.
it's weird. It's very taboo. It really
It
is.
is.
I don't understand it. With all these shows out there, I don't know if it's perception that if you tell a story, you're going to be frowned upon, or what it is, but they just keep it to themselves. They don't talk about it. Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I do the show 30 Odd Minutes with Jeff Belanger, chat show on the paranormal. We had John Zaffis on.
Okay.
John brought his possessed items into the other studio, and that was funny. We were like, "Okay, John,
No comment.
you can put those items away yourself. We're not going to help you pack them up." But John, I was talking to him after the show, and I said, John, I'm having trouble finding spots in Connecticut. And he was like, I've lived in Connecticut my whole life. I've been ghost hunting for over 35 years, and he says even I have trouble getting into places. So I don't know what it is. It's definitely a different frame of mind, from Connecticut to say Massachusetts, where Massachusetts was. Yeah, come on in.
Right.
Yeah, you want a cup of coffee? I'll tell you about what's going on.
Yeah, we actually just got an email from a haunted collector the other day. They actually were looking for places, and I said, well, they're John Zaffis.
Yeah,
That's that group.
yeah.
How are they having troubles, And then, how did they even come about finding us? And so it's just weird. But again, the internet, you can find anyone.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, and so that's very interesting. But I know you have some videos and pictures or so forth to share with us.
Yeah, we can bring up this one video clip. It's labeled the Sam West plane crash. Now, before we bring up the clip, I'll just explain. The Sam West house in Acushnet, Massachusetts, privately owned home.